How can America keep its politics safe? Safe for everyone, but particularly safe for the candidates who are running for the presidency. It is, of course, a huge issue now. There have been 2 attempts on Donald Trump's life. There is a potential threat, of course, to everyone who is involved. And it has an impact on America because in a practical sense, how do people go out and campaign if they're unsafe doing so? But also on a kind of undermining of democracy sense as well, that the whole nation feels itself to be unsafe and unable to be properly democratic. Donald Trump has been talking about the second attempt on his life and using it, it's fair to say, for his own political gain.
They're doing things in politics that have never been done before in the history of our country. And worst of all, with their open borders and bad elections, they have made us into a third world nation, something which nobody thought was even possible. Americans deserve a campaign based on the issues. We try and keep it on the issues. And God has now spared my life. It must have been God. Thank you. Not once, but twice. And there are those that say he did it because Trump is going to turn this state around. He's going to turn this country around. He's going to make America great again. And maybe.
So how does America protect its presidential candidates? Welcome to Americast.
Americast from BBC News.
Hello, it's Justin in the worldwide headquarters of Americast in London, England.
I thought we decided that wasn't funny anymore. It's Sarah here, and I'm in Springfield, Ohio.
And it's Marianna, a.k.a. Misinformation, also in London, also in what we are still very boringly calling the worldwide headquarters of Americast.
OK, it's not funny, but we're doing it all the same. And there's quite a lot that falls into that category. Anyway, so you're in an interesting place. Explain where you are and why.
Well, everyone will remember that Springfield, Ohio is where Donald Trump said that Haitian migrants were taking people's pet cats and dogs and using them for food. Completely untrue, totally baseless rumor, of which there'd been a little bit online, but that he used during the presidential debate to try and highlight immigration.
And that then brings us to the presidential stuff. And of course, it has been one of the things the Trump campaign have been saying is that the rhetoric about Trump being a threat is one of the things that have led to people trying to kill him. We're going to be talking in a second to a former Secret Service agent. But first, let's focus on the Secret Service itself and whether it's failing. Because there is, Sarah, a real debate now, isn't there, about not just about the Secret Service, but about the way it's funded, about the way it's set up, and about who actually is able to get its services.
Yeah, people are starting to talk about the fact that there clearly are not enough resources with the Secret Service. Now, Trump's team cast aspersions that he is being deliberately denied extra security. From the White House, Joe Biden says, well, it's time for Congress to send more money to the Secret Service so that they can do more, because actually they're under huge strain because they're giving full presidential protection to the president, Biden, obviously, and just about as much to both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. That's very unusual. And then there's some other figures like Hillary Clinton who get more than normal amounts of protection. So, yeah, so they're hugely under strain. And there's an economic debate to be had about who should pay for that, which ultimately goes down to Congress. But of course, you know, we're 6 weeks away from an election. This is obviously going to get very political as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it, this business of who gets what level of protection and whether someone who is running for president gets a certain level and someone else doesn't. And it's crucial in the Trump case. We should listen to a clip about this. What if you're a former president and you know that there are a lot of threats against you and then you're running for president?
Well, you got to understand the golf course is surrounded by shrubbery. So when somebody gets into the shrubbery, they're pretty much out of sight. All right. And at this level that he is at right now, he's not the sitting president. If he was, we would have had this entire golf course around it. But because he's not, the security is limited to the areas that the Secret Service deems possible.
So that was Rick Bradshaw, who's the Palm Beach County Sheriff. He's talking about, of course, the golf course where the second attempt on Trump's life seemed to be about to happen. There was certainly a man in the bushes with a gun. And Sarah, that led then, didn't it, to a whole set of other questions about, well, hang on a second, why are you making these kind of grades of coverage when there is an obvious threat to this guy?
Yeah, and I think this is the first time actually people have ever talked about giving full presidential levels of security to somebody who's a candidate or a former president. But you've got to look at the threat. You'll remember Justin Barack Obama got Secret Service protection much, much earlier than a presidential candidate would normally, because there were more threats made against him because he was the first black man who looked like he had a chance of becoming president. Donald Trump, for other reasons, has a serious security threat against him. So, yeah, people are starting to ask questions about whether he deserves the full Monty, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I remember with the Obama years, I remember being really shocked. I was a bit naive, I suppose. I went into a coffee shop in South Carolina during the primary when Obama was against Hillary Clinton, and I was saying to these black women there, and I was saying, "You're going for Obama, you're all supporting him," and they all, to a person, they said no, and they all had kids. They were that kind of age. They'd voted in a few elections. They'd thought about these things. They were all voters. And they all said, we don't want Obama to win because he's got a lovely family and he'll be killed. They were certain that he'd be shot. And I found it really shocking, actually, that a nation that lectures the rest of the world on functioning democracies, etc., can have that level of, and they weren't making it up, too. There was a real threat, obviously, a set of real threats to Obama. But that threat in the background, it's always been there. And now with social media and all the rest of it, it seems to be accentuated.
I mean, it's shocking, obviously, that anybody could get this close to a presidential candidate. I think what's surprising, though, is that it's a right-wing figure like Donald Trump who's being targeted, because exactly that story you were telling about people's fears about President Obama illustrates that often it has been perceived that the threat would come from the right to somebody on the left who was challenging the status quo. And in fact, what we're looking at here is just quite the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, Sarah. And I think that actually tells us something really vital to understand about how this kind of rhetoric on social media and then this kind of behaviour offline is not limited to one particular political group or people of one political side or another. A lot of this is about being driven towards extreme points on either side. And there's a new series I've got coming out next week, Why'd You Hate Me USA, which looks at exactly
seamless.
This.
How does she do it?
Yeah, it looks at exactly this. But also, and I think it's important to understand this, then the different people that become the targets for this sort of hate as well. So you've got people being pushed towards the extremes on either side and then acting on the back of that, trying to actually concretely say, right, this happened because of social media and this didn't, is sort of impossible, but it appears to play a contributing factor in everything that's happening. And then you've got the different targets of this. So we're obviously talking about presidents and presidential candidates, but actually exactly like you said, Sarah, about the average person, the average school in Springfield, Ohio. I've spent some time hanging out with election workers in Colorado for this new podcast series as well. People who are like an IT manager who is suddenly like, I'm being threatened on my way. I'm being threatened for doing my job. And I think most people didn't even know what my job was before, but they believe I'm complicit in plots to, steal the election or rig the election process. And that tends to be, from what they've shown me and what I've seen, hate and threats coming from people who support Donald Trump and believe the election was stolen. But then you've now got people who are on the left who believe, for example, Trump staged the assassination attempt.
Oh, yeah. I met one the other day and she listens to the podcast.
Oh, well, there you go.
I mean, she listens to the podcast, probably a reasonable woman, very reasonable woman. I better say that, hadn't I? Because she's probably listening to this. But she didn't exactly say the whole thing's made up, but she said she had questions about it. And that goes to Sarah's point, doesn't it? That actually there's a kind of, among a lot of left-wing Americans who, let's be blunt about it, kind of think of themselves as rather wonderful people. There's this, how could it possibly be us? How could it be us? Why? I think they're quite surprised, actually, at the whole thing. The idea that Trump is being targeted actually rather annoying for them, because he's not your obvious victim.
Absolutely. And I've talked to people, even just coming to a place like Springfield, Ohio, and talking about the atmosphere around the election, and not even specific to the story here. There is a genuine fear among lots of people that someone is going to get killed before Election Day. That there will at least be another attempt, whether against Donald Trump or his opponents, because you have to wonder what these attempts on Donald Trump's life are doing to the very people Marianna's describing, who probably believe him that these attempts on his life are being inspired by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. There is an incendiary atmosphere around here that feels really quite dangerous, to be perfectly honest. And the threat of political violence has never felt more real.
Right. On that rather depressing note, I think you've got to go, haven't you, Marianna?
I do. I've tried really hard, by the way, Americast, not to make this joke because it's not a very funny topic. However, I should just say to you that Justin is dressed like he's a member of the Secret Service for this podcast record, including with our little earpieces in and in his suit. So it feels like me and Sarah didn't quite get the memo.
I'm wearing a suit because I have to go to an undisclosed location to do an undisclosed thing after the podcast. And I've got a very nice silver case to go with it that looks as if it should have the nuclear codes in it, but actually has a toothbrush.
I don't think we'll start dressing thematically for every episode. But I'm glad you have today.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye, Marianna.
Bye.
Delighted to say we have on the line Bill Gage, who joined the Secret Service quite a long time ago, back in 2002. He's provided a lot of protection to presidents, to vice presidents, to foreign dignitaries as well, because, of course, it's a wider job than just the president or people vying to be president. He was on the counter-assault team as well, protection for George W. Bush after the Iraq War, when there were a lot of terror threats, of course, against the United States and personally against George W. Bush, but also Barack Obama, also, as we've already been talking about, the potential target of racially motivated attacks. Bill, you are exactly the right person to talk to. What an extraordinary career you've had.
I'm a pretty humble guy. You're embarrassing me there a little bit, but yeah, I mean, it is what it is. Great experience. The Secret Service is an incredible job. You know, it takes a toll on your personal life. You're gone 150, 200 days a year sometimes. And you live by somebody else's schedule.
Yeah.
And but an amazing experience. I got to see and do things that you either dream about as a kid or you see in movies.
And you spend a lot
Bill,
of time...
you're describing the schedule of a broadcast journalist trying to cover an election campaign, that's for sure.
Okay.
We want to
knew?
try
Who
and get
knew?
into all of your experience, obviously, and learn what we can about the Secret Service. But just in headline terms to start with, when you heard that somebody had, well, a bullet had grazed former President Trump at a rally, and then this week also heard that somebody else had got close to him with a rifle, what was your first reaction?
Well, if we don't mind, we'll break down both attempts, because the first attempt, I was doing what, it was kind of an off day for me and my family. I was just kind of hanging out around our house, and a friend texted me and said, turn the news on. And I turned the news on, and it had just happened within a couple minutes. And I turned to my wife and I said, how could somebody have got a firearm into the event? Because I assumed it was someone in the crowd. And the Secret Service is divided up into two sort of sections, if you will. There's the uniform division and then the special agent side. And the uniform division provides security around the White House, the sort of physical security for the White House, but they also sort of man, or they're responsible for the magnetometers at all of these events that physically screen people before coming into the event. And these are some of the most sensitive magnetometers in the world. These uniform division officers are the most highly trained problem in the world. I mean, can pick up metal shavings in your pocket. They're so sensitive. And so when I saw that, I turned to my wife and I said, somebody must have had like an AI, printed gun, a wood gun, or something you'd see in a movie for an assassin, because there's no way you could get a gun past the magnetometers. And early on, just knowing what I know, I made some sort of professional guesses there that there was some real miscommunication between the local police officers and the Secret Service advance team about who was covering that specific building and the areas of responsibility. And so that's what, in my opinion, really that first attempt is I think that's what the reports that are coming out are going to show, is that there was some real miscommunication. And, it's not what you see on TV, okay? So it's, perfect world, the service would have put 1,000 agents in Butler, Pennsylvania with 100 counter sniper teams, and everybody has a DNA sample on file that the Secret Service has screened. They know everything about everybody in the crowd. Agents have these Google glasses, lens glasses, that facial recognition software that's tied into drones with missiles. That's just not the reality of protection. It's not like you see in the movies.
I'm really interested by that, because I wanted to be more like in the movies, or maybe I don't because of the freedom aspect of it. But how high tech is it? I mean, is it? You talked about the metal detectors, and obviously there's a lot of very highly armed people around a president or a presidential candidate. But does it go any further than that?
Well, there are a lot of what we would call classified here in the United States. The Secret Service has a lot of classified assets that they do use at these events. But just to circle back and answer your question there, a lot of it is low tech. It's just agents on the ground using their critical judgment and reasoning and their training, putting together these protective models that the Secret Service has used for decades that have been really successful. And so it's kind of a combination of tech and just kind of good old fashioned, what we call here in America, gumshoe, just agents walking around doing their job. So it's a combination of both.
But what about online gumshoe, as it were? I mean, are you really aware? Are agents really aware? Is the service really aware of what people are, how they're interacting online, and kind of potential threats that seem to be obvious from people's social media profiles? Or is that just a crazy thing to ask because there are so many people spewing such a lot of hate that you wouldn't know where to start?
No, listen, the Secret Service, you guys, I just feel like your law enforcement and intelligence agencies are leaps and bounds ahead technology-wise, and I feel like we are. And that's exactly what I was going to get into there was that, for the most part, America and Britain, not a surveillance state, right? Like China or Russia. Both of these most recent potential assassins against President Trump in China or Russia would have been jailed years ago, or at least the most recent assassin for his anti-government feelings. They just would have jailed him, and you never hear from him again. So for the most part, we're not a surveillance state here in America. It's a free democracy, just like Britain, and within reason, you can say or do whatever you want online. It's a crime in America to talk about assassinating the president as a threat. I mean, you and I can talk about it sort of academically, right? But if I go online and say, I hate the president, he should die, someone's going to be looking into that. And these tech companies, they've all of these tech companies have algorithms that are constantly, supercomputers are constantly searching for these words and phrases and combinations of words and phrases, and those kind of things get flagged, and then they get sent to the Secret Service. In addition, the Secret Service has dozens and dozens of agents and intelligence personnel. Their job every day is just to sit there and scrub social media and look for these kind of threats.
Bill, this is really fascinating. But one question, when as lay people we're watching this stuff play out, it's obvious something has gone wrong in both of these assassination attempts against Donald Trump. And as you correctly pointed out, there has then started a political debate about funding and about whether or not, one, whether President Trump has enough security, and two, whether it's politically motivated, the funding of it. But leaving that aside, how can we tell as lay people looking at this whether the mistake is not enough resources on his team or incompetence? I mean, it certainly appears, from what we know about Butler, that had more to do with incompetence than strained resources. But I don't know if we can say the same about what happened at his golf club in Florida.
I think human nature, we want to find out, okay, I want that one thing that went wrong, right? When there's a tragedy or a major incident, we're always looking, I want that one explanation. It's a combination of things. It's a combination of the Secret Service, every director since 9/11, not going to Congress and asking for more money and resources over several decades, and which causes kind of a ripple effect, right? Like a compounding issue year after year after year with increasing mission demands and sort of stagnant or just minimal increases in budget and resources. So, I think it's a combination of factors. And so, was human error involved in Butler, Pennsylvania and in the golf course? Possibly. I think that will come out in some of the reports. But in my opinion, again, formally being on the inside, I think it's mostly going to be an issue of resources with a little bit of possibly incompetence.
Yeah. Tell us more about the golf side of all of this, because you must have spent a lot of your time on golf courses. It is weird. There's something about presidents and golf and just the difficulty of looking after them on the course.
Yeah. And the Secret Service uses sort of a protective model they've used here in America. You guys are probably familiar from World War II history, but Dwight D. Eisenhower was sort of the first president that the Secret Service had to protect routinely on a golf course. And that many years ago, the Secret Service kind of came up with this golf course protective model. We have agents, a few holes ahead. You have agents behind, sort of covering the rear guard, and then you're going to have agents directly around the president as they golf. And that protective model is pretty sound. Part of that model is you're going to have agents dressed like golfers that are actually golfing to sort of blend in, playing golf, but actually in the golf bag is going to be some weaponry. So that model has kind of stuck and been very successful. There's also going to be counter sniper teams and counter assault teams like what I was on the CAT team there as well. Listen, golf courses are like mini nature preserves, right? I mean, there's wood lines, sand traps, water hazards. I'm a golfer. I love the game. And what the average hole is, 300 plus yards. You multiply that times 18 holes. And, it's extremely difficult to protect presidents when they're golfing. Now, President Obama would frequently golf at military golf courses. And those were just a little bit easier to protect because here in America, the president's viewed as the commander in chief. And I can remember multiple times where very high ranking military officers would have a tee time. They would have it reserved weeks in advance and they show up to play and they're turned away, generals and colonels.
So it's a weird job, isn't it? Because you do sometimes have a lot of ability to do stuff, but at the same time, you've got this kind of stress in your mind that there is a constant threat, not just to the life of the principal, but actually potentially to yours as well.
Yeah. And listen, I have, dozens of stories, and I don't want to hyperbole here or over exaggerate, but, there were times where there were serious geopolitical consequences for stuff that was happening real time. There were times
Give us an example.
Well, there was a time in Mumbai, India, where we discovered an Indian police sniper, but we didn't know it at the time. He was covered in a ghillie suit, and we thought it was an actual sniper. It was looking at Obama through his rifle scope. And we had to make a decision, were we going to immediately burst into this speech with President Obama? So there were times like that, but then there were other times where I went to Afghanistan once with the president, President Obama, and my CAT team had been up for like 36 hours straight, and another team relieved us. And there's always a backup plane, a backup Air Force One that flies everywhere with the president in case there's a problem with the primary plane. And we were lucky enough to fly back on the backup plane, and it was just my CAT team, just like 6 or 7 of us, and nobody else on the plane. And we got airborne, and one of the flight attendants came back and said, listen, there was kind of a mess up. We have a bunch of Buffalo hot wings and a bunch of ice cold Yingling beer, and we kind of got to get rid of it before we land in Germany. And so we managed to. We ate all these buffalo wings, drank Yingling. And what a kind of a dirty little secret is, on the presidential planes, the president has access to movies that haven't been released yet into Hollywood. So a president gets them like several weeks before they're actually released. So we were able to watch all these movies that hadn't even been released yet. So there were moments like that in the Secret Service that I remember, just kind of these like, wow, this is a really cool job. And but there were also times, like I said, that there were really geopolitical consequences if you got it wrong.
Bill, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you.
Glad to hear there are some perks among all of the risks that you were taking, Bill.
That's right. Thanks a lot, Bill. Really, really huge pleasure to talk to you. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. I love the UK. I'm going to go over again and visit someday. So I love you guys, and I love the BBC. I listen all the time.
Wonderful.
Thanks for joining us, Bill.
We're honoured to have you. Thanks, Bill.
Bye, guys.
Right, team, that's all we've got time for today. Thanks for watching. Remember, you can hear all our episodes first on BBC Sounds. Bye.